and the surest way to have no thoughts of one's own is to immediately grab a book in every free moment. And this practice is the reason why erudition makes most people stupid and simple, and deprives their writing of success. As Pope says, forever reading, never to be read. Just as the largest library, when not properly arranged, does not provide as much use as a very moderate but well-arranged one, so the greatest amount of knowledge, if not worked through by one's own thinking, has much less value than a far lesser quantity that has been thought through in various ways. For only through the universal combination of what we know, and comparing every truth with every other, do we completely assimilate our own knowledge and take control of it. One can only think through what one knows, which is why we should learn something, but one also knows only what has been thought through. Now, we can always apply ourselves arbitrarily to reading and learning, whereas to thinking we really cannot, for thinking must be kindled and sustained, like a fire, by a draught of air. There must be some interest in its subject, which may be purely objective or merely subjective. The latter is only present in our personal affairs, but the former is only for the minds who think by nature, for whom thinking is as natural as breathing, but who are very rare. Therefore, in most scholars, there is little of it. The difference between the effect that thinking for oneself has on the mind versus that of reading is incredibly large, which is why it constantly magnifies the original difference between minds, by virtue of which we are driven to one or the other. Reading, that is, forces thoughts on the mind that are as foreign to its momentary direction and mood as is the seal to the wax on which it presses its imprint. The mind here experiences a total external compulsion to think this or that at random, for which it simply has no inclination or mood. On the other hand, with thinking for oneself, it follows its own peculiar drive, as this for the moment was more specifically determined by either the external environment or some recollection. Now, this is why very much reading deprives the mind of all elasticity, like a continually pressing weight bearing down on a spring, and the surest way to have no thoughts of one's own is to immediately grab a book in every free moment. And this practice is the reason why erudition makes most people stupid and simple, and deprives their writing of success. As Pope says, forever reading, never to be read. Scholars are those who have read in books, but the thinkers, geniuses, world illuminators, and promoters of the human race are those who have read directly in the book of the world. Only one's own fundamental thoughts have truth in life, for only they are quite properly and completely understood. Foreign thoughts that are read are the scraps of someone else's meal, the discarded clothes of a visiting stranger. The foreign thought that has been read somewhere relates to the thought that originates in us as the fossilized imprint of a prehistoric plant relates to the blossoming plant of spring. Reading is a mere surrogate for one's own thinking. By reading, we let our thoughts be led by another on puppet strings. Moreover, many books are only good for demonstrating how many false trails there are, and how seriously we could go astray if we allowed ourselves to be guided by them. But someone who is guided by genius, that is, who thinks for himself, and that someone has the compass for finding the right way. Therefore, people should only read when the source of their own thoughts stagnates, which will often enough be the case even with the best of minds. On the other hand, it is a sin against the Holy Spirit to scare off one's own thoughts, which have original force, just in order to pick up a book. Then we resemble someone who flees the great outdoors in order to view a herbarium, or to contemplate beautiful landscapes in copper engravings. Even if occasionally we could have conveniently found ready-made in a book the same truth or insight that we produced, only with great effort and slowly, by means of our own thinking and combining, still, it is worth 100 times more when it has been obtained through our own thinking, for only then does it enter into the whole system of our thoughts as an integrated part, as a living member, connected with it completely and firmly. Then it is understood in all its grounds and consequences, and bears the color, tone, and stamp of our whole way of thinking, having come at just the right time when the need for it was stirring. Therefore, it is lodged firmly and cannot disappear again. Accordingly, Goethe's verse here finds its most perfect application, indeed its explanation. He writes, "What you received but as your father's heir, make it your own to gain possession of it." For the man who thinks for himself only later learns the authorities for his opinions, when they merely serve to strengthen his opinions and himself, whereas the book philosopher makes them his point of departure by constructing a whole from foreign opinions he has assembled through reading. This now resembles an automaton put together from foreign materials, while the thinker resembles a living, begotten human being. And this is also how it originated, since the external world fertilized the thinking mind that afterwards carried and gave birth to it. Truth that is merely learned sticks to us, like an artificial limb, a false tooth, a wax nose, or at best one formed by rhinoplasty from another's flesh. But what is acquired through one's own thinking resembles the natural limb, and it alone truly belongs to us. On this is based the difference between the thinker and the mere scholar. Thus, the intellectual gain of someone who thinks for himself looks like a beautiful painting that vividly stands out, with proper light and shadow, consistent tone, and perfect harmony of colors. On the other hand, the intellectual gain of the mere scholar resembles a large palette, full of motley colors, perhaps systematically arranged, but without harmony, coherence, and meaning. Reading means thinking with another's mind instead of one's own, but to our own thinking, from which a coherent whole, a system of sorts, but not strictly closed, is always striving to develop itself, nothing is more detrimental than too strong an influx of foreign thoughts brought on by constant reading, because each of these has sprung from another mind, belongs to another system, bears another color, and will never on its own flow together into a totality of thinking. On the contrary, they cause a soft Babylonian confusion of languages in the head, and the mind that is overfilled with them is now deprived of all clear insight, and thus becomes disorganized. This condition can be observed in many scholars, and results in their being inferior to many uneducated people in healthy understanding, proper judgment, and practical tact, since the latter have always subordinated and incorporated to their own thinking what little knowledge comes to them from the outside through experience. This very thing is done also by the scientific thinker on a larger scale, for even though he requires much knowledge, and must therefore read much, still his intellect is strong enough to master all this, assimilate it, incorporate it into the system of his thoughts, and thus subordinate it to the organically coherent whole of his ever-growing, magnificent insight. His own thinking always dominates everything, like the ground bass of an organ, and is never drowned out by foreign notes, as is the case, on the other hand, with minds that are merely polyhistoric, in which tatters of music in every key are jumbled together and the basic keynote can no longer be discerned at all. People who have spent their lives reading and have drawn their wisdom from books resemble those who have acquired precise information about a country from travel descriptions. They can provide information about many things, but at bottom they really do not have any coherent, clear, thorough knowledge of a country's makeup. Alternatively, those who have spent their lives thinking resemble people who have been in a country themselves. They alone know what they are talking about. They know things there in context. They can be at home. The ordinary book philosopher relates to someone who thinks for himself as the historian relates to an eyewitness. The latter speaks from his own direct interpretation of the matter. This is why, at bottom, all who think for themselves are basically in agreement, and their difference arises only as one of standpoint. But where this does not change anything, they all say the same thing, for they are merely stating what they have objectively apprehended. Often I was pleasantly surprised afterwards to find formulations in ancient works by great men of propositions that I had hesitated to bring before the public because of their paradoxical nature. The book philosopher, on the other hand, recounts what this man said. what that one meant, and then again what another objected to, and so on. This he compares, evaluates, and criticizes, thus attempting to get at the truth of things, and in the process he becomes quite similar to the historian. So, for instance, he will launch investigations on whether Leibniz might ever have been a Spinozist. One might be amazed by the great effort such a man takes, since it seems that if only he tried to focus on the matter himself, he would soon reach his goal with a bit of thinking for himself. Only there is a small drawback here, insofar as this does not depend on our will. We can sit down and read at any time, but not sit down and think. For with thoughts, it is the same as with human beings. They cannot be summoned at will always, but we must wait for them to come. After these reflections, it will not surprise us that the one who thinks for himself and the book philosopher are easy to recognize already by their manner of speaking, the former by the impression of his seriousness, directness, and originality, by the autoptic nature of all his thoughts and expressions, the latter, conversely, by the fact that everything is second-hand, and his style, consisting of conventional, banal phrases and vogue words, resembles a tiny country whose currency consists of nothing at all but foreign coins. Mere experience can no more replace thinking than reading can. Pure empiricism relates to thinking as eating, to digestion and assimilation. When experience boasts that it alone has promoted human knowledge through discoveries, it is as if the mouth were bragging that the existence of the body is its work alone. The works of all really talented minds distinguish themselves from the rest of their character of decisiveness and definiteness, along with the distinctness and clarity that stems from them, because such minds always knew definitely and clearly what they wanted to express, whether it was in prose, verse, or in tones. This decisiveness and clarity is lacking in the rest, and this is what distinguishes them immediately. The characteristic sign of all first-rate intellects is the directness of all their judgments. Everything they produce is the result of their own thinking, and everywhere proclaims itself as such, even in their manner of speech. Accordingly, like princes, they have an imperial directness in the realm of intellect. All the rest are mediated, as can even be seen in their style, which does not have its own stamp. Every true independent thinker, therefore, resembles a monarch insofar as he is direct, and acknowledges none above him. His judgments, like the decrees of a king, stem from his own absolute power and emanate directly from himself. He accepts authorities no more than the monarch takes orders. Rather, he validates nothing but what he himself has confirmed. The commoner among minds, on the other hand, caught up in all kinds of prevailing opinions, authorities, and prejudices, resembles the herd in their silent obedience to laws and commands. People who are so eager and hasty to decide debatable questions by citing authorities are really glad when they can put another's understanding and insight into play instead of their own, which are lacking. Their number is legion. As Seneca says, everyone would rather believe than exercise judgment. Therefore, the weapon of choice for their controversies is the authority. Using an authority, they start beating on one another, and whoever might happen to get caught in the middle does not do well to try to defend himself against them with reason, for against the weapon of authority they are Siegfrieds, dipped in the blood of incapacity to think and judge. Therefore, they will brandish their authorities as an argument whose validity is based on reverence, and then they will shout, "Victory!" In the realm of reality, as beautiful, happy, and charming as it may have turned out, still we always move about under the influence of gravity, which we have to overcome constantly. Conversely, in the realm of thoughts, we are disembodied minds, without gravity and need. This is why no happiness on earth is equal to that which a beautiful and fruitful mind finds in itself in a lucky moment. The presence of a thought is like the presence of a lover. We think we will never forget this thought, and the lover could never become indifferent to us, but out of sight, out of mind, The most beautiful thought runs the risk of being irretrievably forgotten if it is not written down. There are plenty of thoughts which have value for the one who thinks them, but only few have the power to influence through repercussion or reflection, that is, to gain the reader's interest after they have been written down. Still, the only thing that has true value is what someone has first thought merely for himself. Thinkers can be divided into those who think chiefly for themselves and those who think for others. The former are the genuine thinkers for themselves, in the double sense of the word. They are philosophers, for they alone are serious about the matter. It is also the case that the pleasure and happiness of their existence consists precisely in thinking. The others are sophists. They want to shine and seek their happiness and what they hope to obtain from others by so doing. Their seriousness lies here. If we carefully consider how great and proximate is the problem of existence, this dubious, tortured, fleeting, dreamlike existence, so great and proximate that as soon as we all become aware of it, all other problems and purposes are overshadowed and covered by it. And when we now focus on how all people, with a few rare exceptions, are not clearly aware of it, indeed do not realize it in the least, but sooner concern themselves with anything else, and just go on living, mindful only of the present day, and the span of their personal future, which is not much longer, since they explicitly decline to acknowledge the problem or they willingly accommodate it, by adopting some system of popular metaphysics to satisfy themselves. If, as I say, we consider all this, then we could form the opinion that human beings should be called thinking beings, only in the very broadest sense, and henceforth we will not be particularly surprised by any trait of thoughtlessness or simplicity, but instead know that the intellectual horizon of the normal human being, while being above that of animals, whose entire existence is more or less a single present, inasmuch as they are not conscious of future and past, is by no means incalculably higher, as we tend to assume. Consistent with this is the fact that even in conversations, the thoughts of most people are found to be as close-cropped as chaff, which is why a longer thread cannot be spun out of them. And if this world were populated by real thinking beings, it would be impossible for noise of every kind to be allowed such unlimited and generous scope. Now, if nature had really destined human beings for thinking, it would not have given us ears, or at least it would have equipped them with airtight flaps, like those of bats, which I envy. But in truth, we are a poor animal, just like the others, whose powers are calculated merely for the preservation of their existence, which is why we need ears that are always open, so that even without asking, and by night as well as day, they can warn us of a stalker's approach.
Bah. Like, subscribe, notification bell, join the herd.